Benvenuti, Roots Tech. My name is Brian Schneider. I'm a professional genealogist with my Bella Basilicata, located here in southern Italy. And in this session, we're going to discuss influences on southern Italian emigration, why people might have chosen to leave this beautiful part of Italy for destinations in other parts of the world. So first of all, what is Italy? Italy is a country and a culture. So Italy is home to some of the most famous architecture and art in all the world. Everybody knows about the Colosseum in Rome, the famous Renaissance painters and sculptors, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Raphael. Country is also consistently ranked as one of the top tourist destinations. So people come from every continent every year to visit the wonders that are found only here in Italy. And Italian cuisine is popular on every continent. Who doesn't love a plate of pasta or a slice of pizza or an Italian wine to wash it down? So Italian food is known everywhere. So why did so many people emigrate from Bella Italia? We're going to look at some of those influences. So important dates in Italian emigration. So in the 1860s was the Italian unification known as Il Risorgimento. And there were pluses and minuses to that. And many people in the South at that time and still now, it's debated if that was a plus or a negative for the southern part of Italy. In 1888, Brazil abolished slavery. That opened up a market for labor that was pretty much closed before for people with agricultural skills, which a lot of southern Italy was. World War I put a lot of restrictions and just was unsafe for a lot of people to travel in many parts of the world as this conflict spread across continents. And then in 1921, the United States started to impose immigration restrictions. And some of those restrictions specifically considered Southern Italians as undesirables. So restricted the number of Italians from the south of Italy that could emigrate to the United States. So what was the unification and how did that affect the situation here in the south? So prior to the unification in the 1860s, Italy in the north of Naples, or north of Rome, papal states, and then there was a group of various republics and duchies, all independent countries. In the south was the Kingdom of Naples and two Sicilies. And this kingdom was in existence for more than 1,000 years. And it covered most of southern Italy and the island of Sicily. And this is the area that we're talking about today in our session. So let's look at some numbers. So Italian emigration, people leaving, between 1876 and 1926, in this 50-year time period, almost 9 million people went to the Americas, North America and South America. Almost 8 million people went to Europe. And remember that until the end of World War II, Italy did have colonies in Africa, Libya and the Horn of Africa. And these were also destinations for as much as 300,000 Italians. So between 1876 and 1897, Argentina and Brazil were almost equally favored by immigrants. And why was this? The economies in Argentina and Brazil were heavily agriculturally based, and a lot of the people from southern Italy lived in an agricultural based society. Argentina and Brazil and other countries in South America actually had policies to encourage people to come from other countries to come and live and work. They needed workers for plantations. As we mentioned, once slavery became abolished in Brazil, some of these countries actually paid people's passage, their ship passage, to come and work and live in South America. And then after 1898, there was a strong shift from South America to the United States as that economy in North America started to grow, not only agricultural, but mining, industry, and even in New York City, as they were building their subway system, Italians were very important in that process. And then across Europe, Italians, as we mentioned, almost 7 million went to Europe. So we had countries like France and Germany, United Kingdom, and other countries that needed workers. People work in agriculture again, mining, and in factories. Southern Italy does not have much of an industrial base, so they were readily available to go work in other areas. But what was happening in southern Italy that would make people want to leave this beautiful part of the country, this beautiful part of the world, and go travel across an ocean or across a continent to find other work? First of all, Mother Nature, she was always coming into play. So we had a lot of earthquakes. In 1857, there was a very strong earthquake in what is now Western Basilicata, near the Campania border. Was an earthquake that damaged a wide area. Some towns were almost completely leveled. Many people were killed and displaced. This was actually one of the times when people came from other parts of Europe, scientists, to study this earthquake, and started a lot of the scientific study of earthquakes that they still use today. In 1908, there was a devastating earthquake in Messina on the island of Sicily. This was a devastating earthquake in Messina and the surrounding area. Again, a lot of damage, displaced people, injuries and deaths. 1910, an earthquake in the area where Campania and Basilicata border on the northern part of Basilicata. This again, another devastating earthquake. We've got kind of an ongoing theme here. And in this area, there was actually earthquakes again in 1930 and in 1980. So with the geology of Italy, earthquakes along this peninsula, unfortunately, are all too frequent. Something that is a little too familiar to us with recent history, plagues and epidemics. Epidemics were regularly occurring across Italy and Europe. If you go back and look at some of the old newspapers for some of the major port cities around Europe, you might see notices where different ports were closed to ships from different countries, from other countries, because a lot of the plagues and epidemics were spread by ship from one area to another. In the 1860s, there was a large cholera epidemic. In the 1870s, meningitis. 1880s, cholera again. Early 1900s, smallpox. And again in the early 1900s, whooping cough. To understand that in Italy, the towns and the cities are relatively compact. People live very close together. You might have two families in one building, or what now would be considered two houses. So it was a very close contact, some unsanitary conditions, clean water was a problem. And we might not think these types of diseases be considered much of a problem now because of vaccines and modern medicines. But during this time period, a lot of these vaccines were still either being developed or not available on a large scale basis as they would be today. Another situation that was occurring, as we mentioned, about the unification of Italy in the 1860s. And here in the South, there's still discussion of whether or not that was a good thing for southern Italy. And in the 1860s, there was a movement called the Brigantaggio. These were people called brigantes, formed together in bands, mostly peasants who thought things would get better under a new kingdom. but soon realized that things were not any better and sometimes even worse because they had a distant ruler in northern Italy versus the ruler that was in Naples, that was closer. So peasants rose up together, banded together, especially in northern Basilicata. There was a very strong brigantaggio that controlled a large portion of the region. And the troops, the Savoy troops from the north, had to be set down to put down this armed conflict, and it took several years. Again, with the unification, prior to the unification in the south, under the Kingdom of Naples and the Two Sicilies, the Catholic Church had a large social and economic basis and influence on everyday life. The priests were generally from the town that they served. They lived under the same conditions. The church owned large parcels of land in the south that they provided for grazing and for local population. They also, land was used for raising crops. And also something that was important and still important in some areas is just to gather firewood. To be able to cook your meal, to heat your house. You might be surprised the number of houses in southern Italy that are still heated by fire. In some small towns in the winter, you'll see many chimneys with smoke coming out of them as their main heating source. With the unification, the new Kingdom of Italy, one of the things that they did was they wanted to break that strength of the Catholic Church amongst the population. So they took away a lot of the church lands and gave those lands to rich landowners or nobility, many times who did not live in the area, might have lived in the large cities, Naples or other coastal cities, or maybe even Rome or other parts of Italy. So they were not present and may not have had the same consideration for their tenants. A lot of times it was tenant farmer type system. And so created some real problems for this agriculturally based society in the South. So they're talking about farming. Southern Italy was a agricultural based society, agricultural based economy. In many areas it still is. Most of southern Italy, it's a lot of mountains and hills. It's a beautiful picture we see here, but as you can see, it's not real great for large-scale farming. Unless you get near the coasts or southern part down by the Ionian Sea, parts of Puglia, you have flatter areas, but a lot of central area of the south and the island of Sicily, you're going to have these types of farms that are relatively small. So the farming system was such that a lot of the farmers didn't own the land. They farmed the land for an absent landowner, so they were small. If there was a crop failure, droughts, they would then have to borrow money to be able to buy seed for the next year. If you had more than 1 year of bad crops, you can imagine the problems that these created. And you have to think of that here in the South, our summers can be very hot and dry. We can maybe have 4 or 6 weeks in July and August where we don't see any rain. So it can create problems. So these types of difficulties that we were seeing, poor land for farming, it's mountainous, hills, sometimes the condition of the land, of the soil wasn't all that great. Talk about dry periods, it might be a drought. Some of the lands we have problems with landslides. You can find different towns and cities around southern Italy that have actually been abandoned because of problems with landslides. So this creates issues. Lack of industry, lack of jobs. Naples was and is still one of the largest cities in southern Italy. Naples was one of the largest cities in all of Europe during the period of unification. And the large cities were on the coasts. Wasn't a lot of industry in the South. Still isn't a lot of industry, except in Naples and some of the coastal cities. Here in central Basilicata, large-scale industry is still not very common. Also, the problem they had, as we mentioned, with absent landowners, tenant farming system still existed into the early 1900s. The central government located in northern Italy, many people still felt there was a disconnect between that government and the South, which really wasn't addressed very much by the central government until the time period after World War I. So if they go to a new country, they would have new opportunities, jobs, they could find work, earn some income, have money to send back to Italy, back to their families. Actually, the Italian government set up some banking, used some of the banks, especially in Naples, where immigrants that had gone to other countries, they could send money back through these banks to their families in Italy. And that was a very important part of the money coming into the country for many years. So in another country, they would have jobs, opportunities for themselves, and also they were looking at opportunities for their family and their family in the future. So what might their future generations be able to do in their new homelands? But one thing to remember is that not all immigrants who left Italy stayed in their new countries. It was relatively easy to travel from Italy, Port of Naples, to the Americas. And they could go both ways. It was not uncommon to see, if you look through records and immigration records, where somebody has gone back and forth 2 or 3 times. They may have gone to the Americas, obtained a job, became settled, came back to Italy to collect their family. Sometimes they came back and stayed. These were called birds of passage. And it's estimated that as much as 50% of all immigrants from Italy returned to Italy at least temporarily. So there was a back and forth movement. It wasn't always just one direction. So one thing that with the emigration and Italians became part of new societies, and this is a quote from an American statesman in the late 1880s, taking everything together, it would seem that the Italians, in spite of poverty and illiteracy was still very high, are a desirable element to fuse with our motley population. So they're a plus on the new lands that they found outside the borders of Italy. So again, my name is Brian Schneider. I'm with My Bella Basilicata, located here in southern Italy, and hope you've enjoyed this session on influences on southern Italian emigration. And hopefully you'll be able to enjoy some of the other sessions here at Roots Tech. And arrivederci.